Today we start with the post-World War II optimism that's going to be in China. After World War II, they see only the good stuff of what's happening in their country. The problem, however, is that they have a very dependent economy. And because of that, it's going to cause some problems within China. Tensions will begin because of some nationalistic feelings and some selfishness on the part of the nationalists. They endorse a program called protectionism, and protectionism is basically raising tariffs on things that are coming into your country. So they're going to increase the taxes on all foreign goods coming into China. That's going to cause a problem because people want to sell stuff in China, but the Chinese people are not going to buy it because it's more expensive that way. In addition, like I said, they have a very dependent economy. They owe a lot of money to a lot of different countries, and one of them is the United States, and the U.S. wants to collect on its loans. It wants to be repaid, but China doesn't really have the cash to do that. So their unemployment is increasing. They have a dependency on U.S. loans. The only other big money power in the world at this time is the USSR, who is communist. And that's going to start swaying the Chinese people more towards communism after World War II. October 1st, 1949, October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong wins, and he wins China. Remember, Mao was the communist, Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist. And so Mao is finally going to win this civil rebellion against the government, and he is going to convert China into the People's Republic of China, which is a communist government. Chiang Kai-shek is going to run away to Taiwan, where he will establish what is the official Chinese government there. And it is declared as a legitimate government of China, that Mao's government is not the legitimate government. And that is a movement that's pushed by the United States. And the U.S. will also acknowledge Chiang as the head of the government. The U.S. doesn't want to have anything to do with Mao Zedong. They don't like his policies. They don't agree with them. They don't want him to be communist. So they're only going to deal with the nationalist government. After 1949, Mao is going to work on repairing his country. However, he doesn't have a whole lot of money to do that with. So instead, he's going to change how it's run. He does a lot of land reform, taking land from the rich and giving it to the poor. He has something called class conscientiousness, which is where everyone knows their economic status, which is hearkening back all the way to the beginning of the Chinese civilization. Remember those 5 principles? Well, the third principle was knowing one's place in society. Well, class conscientiousness is that. So knowing where they are economically. The poor are going to get good jobs because Mao tends to trust them more than he does the rich. He feels that the rich might give him up to Chiang Kai-shek, and he doesn't want that, so he trusts the poor. Another phenomenon that's going to occur during this time is called speak bitterness. And speak bitterness was this policy or this idea that you could point out the people who have wronged you, especially landowners, people who charged you too high of rent or didn't give you a job or whatever it was. But you point out the people who have wronged you, and the government would make them pay. And unfortunately, this is going to get very, very violent. There's instances where two neighbors had lived side by side for many, many years, and one neighbor's chickens were not cooped up properly, and they got into the other guy's garden and destroyed all his vegetables. And so, speak bitterness, he points out the person who wronged him, his neighbor, and it ends up this big blood feud afterwards that they don't get along, even though they had for years prior to this. By pointing out the things that they've done to each other. It's like a nitpicking kind of thing. It turns into this big competition. Well, on top of this, the U.S. is going to place an embargo on China, which means that the U.S. will not sell to China, and they're not going to buy from China. And that's going to hurt their economy drastically. Between 1958 and 1960, China goes through a famine, and as a result, they're going to have a declining output in their industry. They're not going to be able to produce as much because a lot of their workers are starving or dead. About 10 million people are going to die from starvation in China. The problem with Mao is Mao knows how to fight, not how to govern. And unfortunately, because of his background and because of his history, he's very self-reliant. He doesn't want to ask others for help. He's very focused on reconstruction and not so much pushing past getting to where they were. He's working on getting them back to where they were, but not pushing them beyond that and getting new things and better things. So, like I said, he knows how to fight, but he doesn't really know how to govern a country. In addition, China gets involved in a bunch of external wars. The Korean War is going to break out in 1950 to 1953, and this is going to save the Chinese economy because everybody needs help. Everybody needs ammunition, everybody needs uniforms, everybody needs canned food, and China is willing to give it to them. Well, not give, but to sell it to them. And so that will help out. Then there's conflicts in Tibet and Taiwan and India and Vietnam. And again, all of these are going to help the Chinese economy. In 1971, China will win admission into the United Nations. It takes a while, but eventually China becomes part of the United Nations. In 1972, they receive a visit from the United States President, Richard Nixon. The first time that an American president had made an official visit to China. And in 1976, Mao Zedong dies. And so then again, China is left wondering, what do we do now? China after Mao is going to have a series of moderate leaders. In 1981, Deng Xiaoping will become the leader of China, and he is going to focus on 4 modernizations of China. He really wants to modernize agriculture, industry, science, and defense. And so we will see a lot of economic growth in China, a higher standard of living. Crime and corruption also go up, and inequalities hadn't really been addressed. But he does develop what's called the socialist market system. So it's not really communism anymore. It never really was, but during Deng Xiaoping, it really kind of goes away from that as well. He dies in 1997. He retired from being president in 1989. And one of the things that leads to his retirement is the incident at Tiananmen Square, which takes place in 1989. What happens is that there was this official who was pro-democracy who dies. And a bunch of students get together because they want to praise him. They want to show their support of his ideas and his ideas of political freedom. And so 100,000 students are going to gather together to mourn the death of this pro-democracy official. And it kind of freaks the government out a little bit. And so they start rounding people up and they start, breaking up this demonstration. And thousands are going to be killed or wounded. Most are arrested and then tortured to find out, what's behind this. Are they planning to overthrow the government and all that kind of stuff? But the kind of iconic image that comes from Tiananmen Square is there's this young man who's standing out in the middle of the street and tanks are rolling towards him. And it still is unknown today of who he is. It was never really publicly given information about, or what actually happened to him. Was he killed? Was he captured? Did he get away? Nobody really knows. Even in China today, they're very closed-mouthed about the whole incident. Throughout the 1990s, China has had an increasing population, even though they have limited their families to 1 child per family. That has created its own difficulties, because in Chinese culture, everyone wants boys because boys take care of their parents when they get older, and girls are not as desired because girls marry into another family and take care of somebody else. So that's kind of the idea. So there's been a lot of controversy on abortion in China because of these unwanted girl pregnancies. And so that's caused somewhat of a disparity between the number of boys and the number of girls. They've got a whole generation of boys that may not be able to find wives because there's not enough girls in the country. So we do see a lot of economic and political changes still taking place in China today. They are continuing to grow as an economy. They are becoming a world power that way. And their current leader is Chairman Hu Jintao. And he is, again, progressing China to its position of power that it has today.